We're here tonight to really talk about what began as a subprime crisis and what really spread into the broader economy after the rest of us started becoming impacted by it. I think at the beginning of the crisis, a lot of us thought maybe, this wasn't going to be us. I didn't refinance, I didn't buy, so I'm not going to fall under that radar screen. And of course, that's not necessarily the way it turned out. Just out of curiosity, how many of you own your home or other real estate? Did anyone buy, I know Lance, you had told me, buy during the bubble? Okay, so some people did. And how many people are thinking now about maybe buying some real estate as things seem to be, okay, good. So, good for you. We're going to talk about some of the things, the impacts that the crisis has been having on us. But I think even more importantly than that, we're going to talk about some of the impacts that we can have on the crisis and some of the ways that we can take back the power and really make a difference for ourselves and also for our country. During the middle of the bubble, and Dorothy mentioned it, I was actually running some title companies. So for those of you who own your own homes, you may have gone into a title insurance company to do the closing. They're the people who show you how to sign the documents and make sure you're getting good title to the property. And during the course of that, I observed a couple of things that some of you may have seen too that were sort of leading up to this bubble. But without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, we really don't realize that they're happening. So I saw things like the prices going through the roof. Did anyone happen to observe that during the bubble? I saw things like people seeming to stretch to buy a home. So someone who seemed to be a first-time home buyer, which to me meant, a modest little two-bedroom home, were buying these huge $500,000 McMansions. Did anyone happen to notice that? Yeah. The other thing I saw was these funky loan products. And for those of you who bought during the bubble, you might have seen them too. And the reason I saw them is because I was sort of overseeing these 5 or 6 different offices. And if people were at the closing table and didn't understand something, oftentimes they would pick up the phone and call me and fax me the document or email it and ask me to explain it. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years, and some of these loan products I didn't even understand. So I don't understand how the people who were signing them got it. So in addition to those things, I saw one other thing that really actually 2 other things that really struck me. One was everyone was in the real estate business. Was anyone else here surprised to learn that so-and-so just became a mortgage broker, or Mrs. C is selling real estate now, or the girl who cut my hair had bought 3 condos, and I didn't get it. How was she able to buy 3 condos? The other thing I saw was a lot of people coming in and doing what we call cash-out refinances. Does everyone here know what, I know Diane Brewer will tell us, what is a cash-out refinance?
It's when you refinance your property so that you can take the equity that was built up either by value or just market appreciation, and you take that cash out and spend it.
Right, right. It's when basically you're using, the phrase has become using your home as an ATM. It's when you're taking out the equity and using it as an ATM. Now, did anyone see in the last 3 or 4 years any of these sort of financial gurus that we were all watching on TV suggesting to us that we pay off our high-interest credit card debt by taking out a low-interest home equity loan, right? Would have been a great idea. I think it's a great concept, except for, at least in the companies I was overseeing, most of the people who were doing that would come and they'd pay off their credit card debt, and we didn't have a machine to suck this bad decision-making out of their brains. And they'd go right out and rack up the credit card debt again, and 5 or 6 months later, they'd be there in our office again, taking out the equity that had accrued and paying off another 20 credit cards. So we saw a lot of those things. You'd think the writing was on the wall, but for me, I didn't put that together. And I think most people during the building of the bubble didn't really put those things together. The tipping point came, for anyone who's a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point came when I was at a mortgage broker's default servicing conference in San Diego at the end of 2006. Now, do you all know what default servicers are? I'm not going to make Diane tell us. Those are the people who, once a loan is in default, those are the people who work for the department, and it gets transferred into the bank, it gets transferred into their department, and they're the ones who service the loans once they're not paying, and they decide if you're going to foreclose or how they're going to handle it. So there was a conference for these people in San Diego, and I went out just to see what was going on in that market, and when you're at these conferences, you hang out at the bar downstairs a lot. And so aside from what I learned in the sessions, I learned from every single person that was there that they were completely swamped. They had never seen this many late payments and early defaults on residential mortgages. And something started clicking a little bit. So I get on the red-eye flight to go back. How many people here like flying? Okay, me too. I get on the red-eye flight to go back from San Diego to Miami, and I'm all set. I have my plan A. I have like the eye covers and a blanket, and I have my iPod with all kinds of great music, and here's the plan. I'm going to get on the plane. As soon as it takes off and they start serving drinks, I'm going to have 2 scotches, and I'm going to take a 5-hour nap, right? So I get on the plane, and I'm sitting next to a very nice gynecologist from Pembroke Pines. Which, you know, the conversation's limited because I don't want to know about his last cases, you know? So we're there, and the flight finally takes off, and I go to recline, and tell me if this has ever happened to you. It's one of those seats that don't recline. Okay, so it's time for Plan B. And Plan B was to take out my laptop and do something with it. I didn't know what. And that's how Foreclosure Nation started. I actually started writing the book on the plane at that point. But if you rewind to late 2006, or maybe even before that, just so we can get a clear perspective, if you rewind 5 or 10 years ago, raise your hand if you knew someone who had lost a home to foreclosure 5 or 10 years ago. I didn't either. Actually, you know what? I had met one person, it was a mortgage broker from California, and when she told me, confided in me, don't you wonder sometimes why people confide in you like that? She confided in me that she had lost a home to foreclosure, and it kind of flipped me out. This was actually maybe 20 years ago because it's the only person I had ever met, and she seemed a lot like me, so I thought, you know, maybe that's something that could happen to me. And then the more I got to know her, she was like the kind of person who would totally steal your husband, and I just figured, you know, it was karma, you know, and like I was going to be okay. Anyway, you rewind, you fast forward now to our situation, and of course 9,000 Americans a day are losing their home to foreclosure. 1 in every 375 homes across the country. 14 million people are underwater, and of course underwater means the same thing, it's negative equity. It basically means that you owe more on your home than what it's worth. 14 million people. And here in Florida, we are in just ground zero for the crisis. Our numbers are actually, in some counties, are 1 in every 50 homes are in foreclosure. It's huge. And just last week we read about Bank United, which is the 2nd largest bank failure since IndyMac, right in our own backyard here in Coral Gables. Did anyone see that article in the Wall Street Journal? Okay. I had a question about that article, maybe you can answer, because they were talking about one of the guys who ran one of the groups who's now going to take over Bank United, and they, whatever his name is, John Smith, and then they said like 62 years old. Why did they do that? I mean, if he was 12, that's newsworthy, right? But it's 62 years old. I didn't quite understand that. But hopefully he'll do a good job, because it's a good bank, they have some good assets, they just made some bad decisions, I think. In any event, all of a sudden, this book that I started writing in 2006 seems to be becoming more relevant. And the other thing that is kind of interesting is the way that I was envisioning how this might play out, which was sort of the way I defined a foreclosure nation, was in a nation that became something like this. A nation where foreclosure became commonplace, where everyone knew someone who was in foreclosure, where our kids grew up hearing the word foreclosure, and we're very accustomed to foreclosure being one of the many American institutions. I envisioned a country where if someone made a bad financial decision and was upside down, walking away from the loan would be kind of like a financial planning tool. I envisioned a country where maybe the government would step in if a company that seemed like it should be able to support itself was having a hard time doing that. Maybe the government would step in and help them out. And I envisioned a company where bailouts were kind of commonplace. And lastly, I was thinking when I was writing the book that maybe if this played itself out, just maybe we would have a situation where government could actually change the rules. So maybe people who had invested in these loans and were basically promised by law, by contract, a certain rate of return on their investments, maybe government would just sit down at that poker table and play with an entirely different set of cards and an entirely different set of chips. All of those things sounded very scary as I started writing the book, but suddenly have become pretty relevant. One of the things that Anna had asked me to talk about today is sort of a crash course in what caused the crisis. So I'm wondering from you guys, because I'm guessing you've kind of heard some of those causes. It's referred to as the blame game, which I don't consider it that. As long as we're learning, it's not really blaming. One of the things that I find interesting about the causes is that they are delivered to us in what we call 3-minute sound bites on television. Has anyone ever had the extremely stressful pleasure of being able to deliver a 3-minute sound bite on television? Okay,